I've assisted in the evacuation of wildfires and things like that. I've personally had to evacuate from a wildfire. I know you have as well.
Yeah.
What I witnessed in most of those cases is when you would knock on somebody's door and say, "Hey, I'm here with the sheriff's department. We're asking, the fire's coming. This is your only one and only warning. We don't know if it's going to get here. We don't know how long it's going to take to get here. This is it. We're knocking on your door telling you now. We advise you to get out. We're not coming back." The first thing that people do is they get this kind of, well, what do I bring with? What do I need? Where do I start?
Podcasting from the base of Lake Tahoe in the Eastern Sierras comes the Medicine Wheel. We are a group of progressive physicians seeking solutions and enlightenment while surfing the seas of big data and summiting mountains of research in an effort to make the practice of medicine more personal and medical knowledge more accessible, and empower you, the listener and viewer, to be as healthy as possible. Now, the Medicine Wheel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Medicine Wheel. This is Dr. Sean Devlin, and I'm excited today to talk to a friend of mine and colleague who I've known for over 20 years now. He's in the paramedical field. His name is Matt Clark. Welcome, Matt.
Hi there. Like I said, with that introduction, I am Matt Clark. I'm a National Registered Paramedic. I've worked both in a major metropolitan area, Las Vegas. I've also worked in rural areas and run my own business for a little while as well.
Great. Well, it's good to have you here. Most of our listeners are coming from a variety of backgrounds, and some of them are in the medical field, and some are just concerned about their health. And we have had a broad spectrum of folks on here, but this is the first time we've actually had somebody who's doing sort of street medicine, paramedicine. If you could talk a little bit about what originally got you interested in doing this kind of work, and ultimately what were your experiences within your career as a paramedic?
I was always a very odd child, straight up. Never wanted to really do anything else. When I was a little kid, this is what I wanted to be: a mountain climber and a paramedic. Sometimes an astronaut too, but that's a whole other story. The story is told by my grandmother that she came outside one time, and I was like probably 4 or 5 years old, and on top of the neighbor kid, and he's going, "Stop doing that, you're hurting me," as I'm doing CPR on the neighbor kid. I'm like, I'm saving him, as they're dragging me off of the neighbor kid. I collected first aid kits where a lot of people collected baseball cards. I was always fascinated by the drama and I don't know what else to call it, of emergency medicine. I watched Emergency as a kid. I grew up on Johnny and Roy. All of those things, I guess, kind of led me to being a paramedic. A lot of people, when I was growing up, were like, you're much better than that. You don't need to be that. Be a doctor, be a dentist. You have a talent for causing things pain. Sorry, Little Shop of Horrors. But eventually I got around to doing what I wanted to do. And I spent a lot of years as an EMT basic, a few years as what was then called an intermediate or advanced, and then went to paramedic school, and ultimately spent about 5 or 6 years in different environments being a paramedic. I'm still a paramedic. I'm not currently working due to some mental and physical health issues. Working on the street, it's changed a lot in I guess it's 27 years since 92, so almost 28 years that I've been involved in EMS. It's changed a lot. It changed me. You go into it thinking one way, feeling one way, that you're going to go help a lot of people, and it's going to be a lot of drama, and it's going to be a lot of excitement. And after a while, you start to learn that it's not really that. And it's gotten more so, I think, as the years have gone on. I think that 911 and first responders and medicine in general, from what I've seen, has become a victim of its own media. We've hyped it up so much about telling people that yeah, just call 3 numbers. We can solve any problem. Don't worry about it. Don't use any judgment. I don't want you thinking about this. Just call 911. We'll come and we'll take care of it for you. We become a victim of our own success now. Now people aren't. Oh, I stubbed my toe. I don't know. Should I go to the hospital? I don't know. Should you? I mean, it's a stubbed toe. There's not much I can do for that. You're not a blood sprinkler or anything like that. It's
Sure.
And there's a lot of pressure, especially for people like me who primarily worked in private EMS, to transport. I mean, if you call a private, if you call a 911 ambulance in a system that's primarily served by private EMS and ask them if you should go to the hospital, the answer 99.9% of the time, whether we think you do or not, is going to be yeah. Because I'm paid by, I shouldn't say I'm paid by, my company is paid by the amount of transports that we do. I've been told by management at different times in different places that, look, if that box is empty, you're not making me any money. And, it's a little hard sometimes to accept that and to understand that it is a business. My personal feelings aside, should it be a business? I don't know. In the United States, we have this idea that everything should pay for itself, that everything should at least pay its own way. And I don't know if that's possible in medicine in general, much less street medicine.
So for people out there who aren't familiar with this concept of sort of a private corporation or industry providing, paramedicine, emergency medical responders, there is such a thing as county-supported,
Yes.
city-supported programs that don't require basically a third-party billing event to take place between the client, which is the recipient that's getting transported, and that company that's providing the transport. Because that's technically what your company is doing. They're moving one person from their home to a hospital for money.
Correct. And the craziness here. So there's a lot of systems where the fire department provides this or a county-funded third service provides this. They're still billing, even though your tax dollars are paying for this on top of that.
So they have a subsidy, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So they have a subsidy. So they're, in my opinion, double dipping. A lot of places, a lot of larger urban areas also run a private EMS system, either in conjunction with or just below the publicly funded EMS system. The irony that I've witnessed is that a lot of times the publicly funded services will take the better calls, the ones that are frankly more likely to pay, and leave the ones that aren't as likely to pay to the private EMS systems that are trying to earn a buck on this. Like I said, I probably get in a lot of trouble for talking about these kinds of things, but this is not just in one location. This is, I've witnessed this pretty much globally. I've worked, in different areas all across the country. There's a lot of when a private service gets a contract to provide 911 service, when a private ambulance gets a contract to provide 911 service, frequently what's involved is an obligation by whatever organization, whether it's a hospital or a county or what city or whatever, to provide 911 services in addition to providing the interfacility transports. Where a company will usually make their money is on those interfacility transports. They're not making any money. They're losing money on 911. Mm-hmm. They make money when Dr. Devlin in Nowhere, Nevada says, I need you to take this guy to a cath lab in the city. Okay. He's relatively stable, but he still needs somebody to monitor him on the way in. Come swoop him up, drive him into town. Or Hospital A doesn't have a cath lab that day, but the patient wound up at Hospital A. and he needs to go to hospital B where they do have a cath lab or a surgeon or whatever specialty that he needs. That's where the private ambulance companies are really making their gravy on those types of things, nursing home transports, things like that. And frequently the more public-funded entities will try and stay out of that. They'll just do the 911 stuff. And then when they do the 911 stuff, they'll just take, I guess for lack of a better word, the cool stuff. The cardiac arrests, the gunshots, the big stuff. And it's like, if it's just a drunk guy on the ground, they'll leave that to the private people. Private service can take that. We don't need to mess with that. If it's just a psych, we'll just, somebody else can take that.
Well, you brought up a couple interesting things. I know it's a little bit behind the scenes, sort of what takes place in emergency medicine. One thing that I sort of picked up on was sort of your analysis. It sounds as though you maybe have had mixed feelings about this career you got into, and it sounds as though you're seeing it through a darker lens based on just the conversation we're having now. Do you think that's felt by a lot of the folks that are doing EMS these days? Is that kind of what the feedback's been? Is there a high level of burnout and turnover?
There always has been. It's always been a very stressful job. It's a job that people think pays a lot of money, but unless you're working for a government agency, does not. National average for a paramedic, working for a private company, somewhere around $20 an hour, plus minus. It's always been one of those things that for what we do, first off, not a lot of people know what a paramedic's scope of practice is. Second off, there isn't a universal standard for what a paramedic can and can't do. There is a standard that we're trained to, but what we're allowed to do varies from city to city, county to county, state to state, and it doesn't necessarily transfer. You as a physician, if you're board certified in family medicine or emergency medicine, you take your DEA license and you go to whatever state you go and apply for the board, and usually it's like, okay, you're a doctor and you can go do whatever it is the doctors do. Me as a paramedic, even coming from a county to another county or a service to another service, I could have a whole other set of medications that I'm allowed to give or not give. I could have a whole other set of tools that I'm allowed to use. Here I'm allowed to do IV pumps. Over here, nope. Over here, I'm allowed to do mini vents or even full vents. Over here, no. Over here, I'm allowed to push this many drugs. Over here, I'm not allowed to push that many drugs. Some places, I operate almost completely autonomously with just a set of written orders somewhere in the background, and no contact with the hospital at all until I walk through the door. Other places, I have to ask to do everything. If I want to start an IV, if I want to, defibrillate, if I want to push a medication, it's all get on the radio, talk to somebody. Okay, Mother, may I please? It's a very conflicting job that way. And then when I roll into an emergency room, there is always... Emergency rooms have been a primary care catch-all now. I knew one physician that overheard him sitting, he'd get his desk set up there in the emergency room. He's like, okay, let the primary care begin. And it's... So when I come through the door with yet another case that really doesn't need to be in an emergency department, it's just, you're sick. Yeah, I get it. Non-critical. I'm the lowest. I'm the garbage man that's bringing the garbage to the landfill, and the landfill is already full, and the attendant at the landfill is going like, "What do you want me to do with this?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I can't put it back on the street." Not to equate people with garbage, but it's that kind of it's that kind of mentality. It's like
Well, I think you bring something up by even segueing into that conversation piece and using those words, is like, how demoralized are you as a paramedic? How demoralized are you as a human being? And how dark is the world you live in that you would now consider somebody, a living human being, somebody that you're there trained to care for and keep alive, as garbage? And I think that's a good sounding board to talk about, because ultimately at the end of the day, I could be one of your patients.
Right.
I mean, our AV guy could be one of your patients.
Absolutely.
Okay, so no matter what we do as practitioners in healthcare, we always have to hold the highest regard for human life and human beings. So, and not to take this lightly, but I think you need to be aware that when you're seeing the world in those ways, that's caustic and that's detrimental to your ability to practice good medicine.
Absolutely. And this goes back to one of the reasons why I'm not currently working. It's very difficult, especially working inner city, to large city stuff, to view people as humans, and not just. I'm not just talking about the homeless guy. I'm talking about in general. It's the pressure to turn calls, to perform. We have 30 minutes. I pull into a hospital's bay. I have 30 minutes to offload this patient and do my paperwork, get back on a truck and get back out and go get another one. That's the cycle. You start to it does get exhausting, and you start to just. There's a part that you need that's necessary to detach yourself from the human suffering, and then it goes too far, and that has happened to me, where it goes too far, and you're now completely detached. You don't. You're like, whatever. Okay. It's not that you can't dig deep and find it, but that. Most of the time, you realize that it's an emergency for them, but it's not really an emergency for you. And it gets real frustrating sometimes when you're dealing with stuff that, look, I've literally, this is an injury or an illness or a problem that I was taking care of by myself when I was 12 or 13 years old. And here you are an adult. How did you survive to adulthood? How did you, and I, it's not a popular opinion, and I'm not saying that it's a universal opinion or feeling among EMS providers, but I think that there is, especially in inner city services, there's a lot more of that than we let on, and some people are better at disguising it than others.
I've known you for a long time, and I would say that you've probably used dark humor as a way to cope, as a way to deal with issues, including potentially compensating for stuff that you see in the work site and in the environment that you've described to me. Ultimately, you have seen some horrible things, and ultimately you, in fact, were part of this Las Vegas shooting response incident. And so that in and of itself, even if it happens in your own city, can cause PTSD. And we were talking a night ago, and you even said watching the stuff on TV can trigger PTSD in people. Ultimately, sure. But at the end of the day, when it's their blood on your hands in real time, that's disconcerting. And obviously people compensate and deal with that in different ways. So I know you're kind of taking a hiatus from paramedicine right now, but when you look back on things, how do you think all this stuff that's gone on in your career affected you?
It's a difficult question to answer because it's such a gradual change. It definitely has. Certainly, like almost everyone else, when I got into medicine and paramedicine, emergency medicine, I was very eager. I was very, hey, let's go out. We're gonna go save the world, man. We're gonna go. I want lots of calls. Give me all the bad stuff. Whatever. Bring it all the stuff. just before, at the end of my current job, or my previous job, I was with a new person, a person who had just kind of entered into the business, who was like that. And I sat him down one day and basically told him, I'm like, look, this is like Daddy taking a 3-year-old to Disneyland. Okay, I'm happy to do it. I'm glad you're having fun out here. Daddy's tired. Daddy needs to sit down for a minute. You know, you have two choices. You can either be energized by that person, which unfortunately didn't work for me. I wish it had. Or you can just be like, you know what? It's like this. No, don't wish for this stuff. Trust me, it's gonna come. And it's also the fact that this person was a junior to me as far as skill-wise, as far as training-wise. It's like, look, you know, I don't know why you want all this craziness, because you're not going to be the one that's dealing with it. I'm going to be the one that's dealing with it in the back. You're just going to be driving for me. You know, I can't. I'm not. You know, I'm not trying to pick on you or whatever. You know, I'm not poo-pooing what you do, but it's like, if you want patience, if you want to learn the trade, you should be looking for something that's a little lower, less intensity, because those are calls you can take, versus, you know, you want these crazy calls where, okay, but I'm going to be the one that's doing 90% of the work.
Beyond your skill set.
Yeah,
you
right.
Just be watching.
You know, so it's changed me. It definitely. I'm tired. You know my health problems. I've got some physical health problems. It takes a toll on your joints. There's no ergonomic way to lift a 300-pound patient from between the toilet and the tub and get them onto a stretcher. You're going to hurt. You know, somebody's going to get hurt. Emotionally, I think that, you know, definitely it's like you wake up one day and somebody's pointed out something that you just did, and you're like, oh wow, yeah, I guess you know, that was kind of fucked up. You know, I should. I mean, it's not like, you know, not like I'm lining people up against the wall and shooting them or something. You know, I'm not, you know, bathing in the blood of children or anything like that. But it's like, yeah, I should not have done that. That wasn't cool. But you see so much callousness, both between humans to other humans. Just, you know, you're like, wow, you know, this mom just punched her 3-year-old for spilling, or, you know, her 4-year-old for spilling a milkshake in the car. Just punched the kid in the face. Yeah, right. You're like,
it's brutality,
right? You know, the human brutality, and the brutality of the institutional brutality of when you call Child Protective Services for this call. Child Protective Services shows up and goes like, yeah, we're going to take mom to jail or whatever, but mom wants the kid to stay with this person. And I'm like, why does mom get a say at all in what happens with this child? You know, if same things happen with elderly calls, you know, same thing where you see elder abuse and you're like, hey, you know, come out and take care of this problem. And they're like, oh, we'll start an investigation. I'm like, start an investigation? This guy's going to be dead by the time you come out here and start an investigation. I think that was as exhausting as anything else. It's like you start out, you're thinking like, oh yeah, I'm going to be one of these protectors. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm going to be one of these people that step in the crisis, and I'm going to take this person out of the crisis, this domestic violence problem, or this assault problem, or, you know, whatever it is, child abuse, elder abuse, and I'm gonna solve this problem. I'm gonna contact the right people, and we're gonna there's processes to deal with this. And what you find out is that when you activate those processes, whether it's law enforcement or child protective services or adult protective services or different mental health services, they're so exhausted as well that they're like, you know, we'll do that.
So the whole system's burdened.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, suffering a little bit from PTSD.
Well, so. You know, Z-Dog. You know,
sure, of course, out of Vegas. Yeah.
Yeah. He's actually out of the Bay Area now.
He moved to the Bay
Area. Moved to the Bay Area. But I don't know him personally, but I watch a lot of his videos and stuff, and I liked what he was talking about, his, don't call it burnout. it's emotional injury.
Yeah. Moral injury. Yeah.
Moral injury.
And we have actually talked about moral injury on the show a little bit, and yeah, to a certain degree it is, and it's a shame that providers such as ourselves, and specifically in the emergency medical services, don't have the resources to call upon, whether it be Belant or counseling or just even small group interventions where people can kind of talk it out, be in some sort of process. Z-Dog also had it was a blog post or a podcast in which he actually talked about integrating the use of some shamanic tools to treat people who have PTSD, some of that including the use of like psilocybins or other psychoactive substances. I don't know if that's totally applicable for everybody, but certainly there's people out there that could benefit. One thing I wanted to talk to you about before we segue over to another area that you're sort of an expert in and have some specialty interest in is when you look back on your experiences in EMS, what would you tell somebody besides, I know you had this younger EMS or EMT student with you or practitioner, what would you tell somebody interested to doing paramedicine? What would you tell them?
I want to circle back to that one, but one of the things I want to touch on that you talked about with group therapy and the interventional, it would be disingenuous of me to say that those services are not available. To me, there are employee assistance lines, there are peer counseling and things like that are out there. Culturally, especially in the era that I came up in, those things were frowned upon.
You need to do it yourself.
Right, exactly. It's like yeah, if you can't handle this, then this
ain't for you.
Exactly. This ain't the job for you. You handle this by hitting the bar at the end of the shift or whatever. So it would be disingenuous of me to say that there are no services or no processes in place to deal with the stresses and the moral injuries that do occur. A lot of it is the culture. And the younger people are a little better at it, but I've even seen some of the younger people that are coming up now having the same problem with the culture of, no, you just deal with it. You just deal with it. Circling back to what would I tell somebody who wants into the business now? You better really want it. This better be a calling for you. If you're in this for some sort of job security or because you think you're going to make a decent living at it, you can at the highest levels of it. But the EMTs and the advanced EMTs who are not paramedics yet, I've seen guys quit and go back to waiting tables because they were just starving to death. Go back to being personal trainers because they were just starving to death. The hours are incredibly long. The sacrifices that you make, I know people that have had families and that have successfully raised kids and everything else. It's possible, but I worked a 12-hour shift in most cases. By the time you factor in a commute, it's a 14-hour day. Not to mention any holdovers or any paperwork or anything that you have to get done at the end of your shift before you clock out. There's not much left at the end of a 14-hour day. And you work 3 days one week, 4 days the next. Most people I know will quietly tell you that, yeah, you spend your first day off just sleeping or just as a blob. It's not, especially if you work at nights.
Right.
It's not like you just, oh yeah, it sounds great. You get 3 days in a row off. You get 4 days in a row off. You're living the life.
You're recovering.
Exactly. And it takes a lot to break through that shell. It's cost me relationships. You better really want it. You better really be called to do the job. It's a noble job. It's an underappreciated job. It's a job that needs doing, and it's a job that, frankly, not everyone can or should do. Have an exit strategy. I didn't have an exit strategy. This is all I ever wanted to be. It's all I ever wanted to do. I don't have an exit strategy. I should have gotten out a while ago.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I want to thank you for being honest and straight up with us. And I know this sometimes is a difficult, challenging topic, and I know how long you've been committed to this journey, and you finally got there, and you have a few good years under your belt, but you obviously have learned a lot of lessons along the way. I want to transition to talking about something else you have a passion for, and that's sort of preparation in times of need. Preparations in times of disaster. But we're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to build back up with a few questions and introductions to prepping in our next podcast.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Hey, this is Dr. Sean Devlin. Welcome back to the Medicine Wheel. I'm again here with Matt Clark. He's a paramedicine expert as well as a sort of a prepper. I don't sometimes know people like to use those terms, but somebody who's a big fan of prevention over, costly intervention. And one of the things we like to talk about with him today is how he would put together or visualize or technically develop a go bag. And if you're not familiar with what the term go bag is, it's basically a ready-made sack, satchel, backpack that you can grab within seconds, put in your vehicle, put on your person, and move around with, that could help provide for your protection and sustainability if an environmental disaster, a man-made disaster were to take place, or you were to find yourself in a situation that you weren't really aware was coming your way. Again, welcome, Matt.
Well, thanks for having me back. A little bit of background on where this comes from and where I come from on this. Again, as I said in the other interview, I was always kind of an odd child and kind of fascinated with the drama and angst of disaster. I was also a search and rescue technician. I've had friends who have had to evacuate from things like hurricanes, wildfires, other things like that. I've assisted in the evacuation of wildfires and things like that. I've personally had to evacuate from a wildfire. I know you have as well.
Yeah.
What I witnessed in most of those cases is when you would knock on somebody's door and say, "Hey, I'm here with the sheriff's department. We're asking, the fire's coming. This is your only one and only warning. We don't know if it's going to get here. We don't know how long it's going to take to get here. This is it. We're knocking on your door telling you now. We advise you to get out. We're not coming back." The first thing that people do is they get this kind of, well, what do I bring with? What do I need? Where do I start? Kind of thing. And then, another friend of mine was in the islands when the hurricane hit, and talked to him about, okay, you pretty much got the last plane out. How do you, what do you wish you had ready to go? How was this? It's also based around what we call the 24-hour pack or a field pack, with some additions and with some tweaks to it for doing this kind of work. But for search and rescue, when you get a call out, okay, here's my pack, I can now go for 24 hours and do a search and not have to have any external support for that. Talking about this first slide, how to build a bag that's right for you.
Well, let's and sorry to interrupt, but this
okay.
is a PowerPoint that we're going to run alongside this interview, so people can kind of follow along as to what you're going through. But you've done a very nice job creating a very simple, straightforward presentation, and so we'll take our time going through that. So go back to it.
Okay. So like I said, the first slide here is pretty much the philosophy of use, and there's no one size fits all that's going to be a good idea for everybody's emergency bag. Somebody who lives in an area where they have tornadoes or hurricanes is going to be different. They need different things than somebody who lives where they have earthquakes and wildfires. Somebody in a desert is going to need different things than somebody who lives in, say, Florida or Georgia or whatever. Everybody's going to have some different needs. So the first thing that you're going to do is do an honest risk assessment. What really, people talk about the zombie apocalypse thing and say, well, if you're ready for zombies, you're ready for anything. I disagree with that slightly. That kind of mentality of, oh, I'm going to be ready for freaking everything, man. I'm going to be able to take anything on. You throw it all at me. That is both a intellectual and an economically daunting.
Right.
You're going to have a huge, you go down a rabbit hole that's insane. Really, it's bordering on insanity.
So keep your preparation very realistic.
Exactly. Make a realistic assessment of what you're going to do, not only in the area that you're going to be in, but also the area that you plan on traveling to. And we'll touch back on that as part of your plan for evacuation is, do you have places around? Do you have friends? Do you have family? Where are you going to go?
Right. So bug out bag, bug out destination.
Right, exactly. And it doesn't have to be the fortified cabin in the woods, with
Right.
with that. It can just be a friend's house across town.
Right.
If there's a civil disturbance in your area that you got to get out of, or there's an earthquake or a fire or a tornado and your house just got wiped out, maybe your friend across town is fine. Can you move over there? Can you leave this? Do you have friends outside? Within 6 or 8 hours, do you have enough gas to get to them that you can evacuate to that, where maybe they're not affected by whatever local problem is going on? Because most things that you run into are more or less localized, or at least regional. And your pack content should change with the seasons and your locations. I prefer a lightweight bag. Kind of like, I forget who said, science should be as simple as possible, but no simpler.
Right.
Keep your bag relatively lightweight. If you're carrying this giant 60 pound bag, number one, you're not going to carry it very far.
Right.
And two, if you have to store it someplace, you're just going to throw this in a closet and you're never going to keep it with you. You're never going to have it with you. So it should be scaled. The bag that you have, at your house that's next to your bed that you're going to throw in the car can be bigger than the bag that you keep in the office or at school, or at work with you, that you're just going to run and go to your car with, kind of thing. You're just going to get out of the building. So you want to look at what you're going to be doing with the bag. You're going to be going maybe from work or traveling back to home, just to a safer location, like I said, across town even. And if you need to, you should be able to use this bag if you have to shelter in place for the long term. So if you're in an office building and they say, hey, power's out, subways aren't running, whatever, you're going to have to stay where you are or walk. Well, depending on how far you have to walk, it might be better just to stay at the office if they'll let you, or stay in the building that you're in and curl up in a corner and wait for things to come back, if it's safe enough to do so. So just take all those things kind of into consideration as you're putting together the list for this pack. I prefer no more than about 10 to 50% of your body weight, and you only really need to carry enough for a max of about 3 days. Most things, I'm not saying they're going to be resolved within 3 days.
Usually help will be on the way within 72 hours. That's
Usually.
at least that's what FEMA would hope.
Well, don't even start with that. That's a whole other issue. But the idea of a max of 72 hours is it also helps you keep your weight and the contents realistic. By then, probably you're going to be looking to do other things. You're going to be moving up the scale of, like, if this pack hasn't done it within 72 hours, hopefully you've at least gotten out of the area within 72 hours. Maybe you're not sheltering in place, but 3 days should get you at least out of the immediate affected area of where you're at.
Well, what I like to demonstrate here is, because what you're saying is really important. We have two dichotomies here, because we do have, these, sometimes wildfires, we'll say, because both of you and I have had experience with that. It's like when we look at the Paradise Fire in Northern California, this was really within minutes. Mm-hmm. The world around people changed.
Right.
And this kind of go pack would be absolutely perfect. And then you think about, hey, listen, I'm overseas. on the coast of Japan, and now I'm quarantined to the Princess Cruise Line vessel because everyone has coronavirus around me. What do I do now? And then how could we use, things from this pack or from this prep to deal with, a 14-day extended stay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And like I said, there's always going to be the exception to the rule about, okay, this is, we're now stuck, and like I said, 14-day extended stay. Some of this will make you a lot more comfortable. Mm-hmm. It won't solve every problem that you have, but usually by the time you're talking about 14 days, there's some sort of external aid coming in within within that amount of time, right. And trying to be realistic about it. It allows the pack to just be modified. If you're doing little modules, you can just keep rolling with things. And they don't always have to be the same modules. You don't have to be these huge modules I'm going to show you in this great big pack that I've got. But it also helps you from losing equipment. I learned this very valuably just doing winter camping. If you drop something out of your pockets into a snowbank, it's gone. Drop it into the water or the mud, it's gone. If you're opening up this pack and you have to rummage through everything and it's not containerized, and you're pulling out all these little things, something's going to get lost. Whereas if you only have to explode out one small package, A, it minimizes what can get lost, and B, your chances of it getting lost are much less. And it's easier to quickly find items as well. Your pack should be low profile. We'll talk about this a little bit. You and I are both 2A guys. When we go through this pack, you'll see that there's not weapons, there's not machetes, there's not battle axes, there's not firearms, there's not, the worst things that's in here is maybe a pocket knife or a multi-tool. The reason for that is that experience has shown us that even if it's not martial law, sometimes there's checkpoints, sometimes there's different things where if you're crossing through these things might flag you as a person to either be detained,
further searched,
yeah. As a person who might have bad intent. Mm-hmm. It can be a hassle. You must choose. There's no right or wrong answer whether or not you should carry a weapon in this pack. In this pack, I chose not to. I chose not to build that because it's not for everybody.
Sure.
So that's going to be a decision that each individual is going to have to make on their own as far as where they're going to weaponize up. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have a weapon for self-defense, but it's something that you have to take very seriously.
Yeah, and carries a lot of responsibility.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And like I said, and this also says you might have to use public or mass transportation. How many pictures have you seen of people in flooded areas being hauled out on military trucks or on military boats? I like something that I can sit on my lap. If it fits within my profile while I'm seated, I know that probably nobody's going to tell me to leave it behind. Right. If it's this giant thing that's taking up extra space and takes up the room another person would use,
too cumbersome.
Right, they're going to tell me you got to leave that behind. That's not going to work. But if you're talking about a 10, 15, 20-pound pack that fits within your profile, and you're saying this is my essentials, this is what I got to keep with me, most places are probably going to be pretty okay with you saying, okay, unless it's like an aircraft where it's like we just can't take more away. But small boats, trucks, buses, things like that are going to be like, that's fine. You can go ahead and keep that with you. Humans basically, there's in survival they call it the rule of threes. It's 3 minutes without air, 3 hours roughly in extreme weather conditions, so extreme hot or extreme cold without finding some sort of shelter. Or I also like to lump in security with this. If there's a civil disturbance going on, if there's physical threats to you, that you need to be you've got maybe 30 minutes or 3 hours tops of running and hiding to get yourself away from this riot or from whatever's happening before you get caught up in it. So, so 3 hours for that shelter security kind of thing, which is the first thing we're talking about here. Then there's 3 days without water. I think that's a very generous estimate. Maybe in a very well hydrated person in a tropical,
right.
But you start to lose performance and morale and thinking ability very quickly when you dehydrate. And 3 weeks without food. Same thing. I think that's a very generous. You probably go 3 weeks without food, but
You're not doing a whole lot.
Exactly. You're not functioning at a very high level, and by the time you're at that point, you're as good as dead. So going back to this shelter, about 3 to 8 hours in all but the most temperate conditions. If the sun's out, there's all things like about relative humidity and temperature ratings for the human body. But basically, you need to regulate your temperature. You need to get either into shade or warmth. You need to get some layers on, fire started, some shelter around you. Get out of the wind, get out of the water, whatever it is that you're getting out of. And that says to include a smoke-filled environment. We'll talk a little bit about that. That 3 minutes without air. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're underwater. When the towers came down, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of dust, there's a lot of smoke. There's a lot of people choking and having respiratory problems. And if you have pre-existing respiratory problems, that's going to be a bigger issue for you. Wildfires, that smoke, you've been there, you've seen it. People who live in the Southwest with haboobs, with the giant walls of dust, you don't protect your airway, you don't protect your lungs, even for a short period of time with those, you can get really sick and get incapacitated pretty quickly. Getting back to the shelter, there's 4 ways we get rid of heat. Convection, conduction, radiation, and evaporation. You want to address each one of those. And we'll go into that in detail later. If we want to go into that in a different one, it's probably not the right format here. But the first layer of shelter for me is always clothing. Granted, that doesn't mean that I have to go to work every day or to the mall, whatever, and be dressed like, okay, I'm going to have to survive in, whatever Arctic or blazing hot sun conditions are outside. But you need to be able to have those available to you. For one, start out dressing appropriately. Are the shoes that you're wearing appropriate to walk in, or even over debris or rough terrain, or to run in? If not, do you have easy access to shoes like that? If you're going to a formal gathering or whatever, and you're in loafers, or you're a lady, you're in heels, whatever, you can't. But consider that when you're choosing your clothing when you're going out. It doesn't have to be this dress like Indiana Jones or dress like a special operations person or whatever. I mean, clearly, looking at us, this is normal, everyday wear. But I have access to, just outside the building in my vehicle, I have access to layers that are more appropriate for the conditions that we're in. I like to first thing put on a hat. So avoiding cotton completely, it's great if you can pull it off, but you can't really. Cotton's a great fiber. There's nothing wrong with cotton except for the fact that it retains moisture and it can suck heat. That can be a good thing if you're in the middle of the desert, but it's usually a bad thing. So I like to have just the layer available to me, and we'll talk about that when we get over and look into the other things, but a wool or synthetic base layer that I can get next to my skin so that I don't have the cotton right on my skin. Something that dries and wicks water very quickly. And it allows you to save some money because you don't have to have this full set of combat gear or expedition gear with you all the time. And we'll see that when we go through the bag. There's a quick picture of it over here. Whoop. This is the clothing bag. You'll see it, and we'll go through it in detail, but there's basically some wool socks, some wool underwear, a hat, bandana, sun hat, warm gloves, and a lightweight jacket. Doesn't take up much space at all. You need to be able to get out of the weather and start a fire. Starting a fire may or may not be a good thing. You'll have to decide that tactically, whether or not you want to draw that kind of attention to yourself, whether it's safe, whether there's gas leaks, whether there's smoke's going to draw unwanted attention to you, whatever. But you should always have the ability to do so. Have multiple ways of starting a fire most of the time, and a way to insulate yourself from the ground. That's that conduction that we're talking about. You sit on cold ground. with no insulation on there at all, it's going to suck the heat right out of you. Sitting on a cold, wet ground is going to make you, even if you've got a down parka on, it's probably going to make you super cold. And then there's another picture here with my fire and shelter kit. You can see what's on there, some matches, some tinder tabs, a second way of starting fire, in this case a ferro rod and striker, some cord that's also got some built-in fire starting ability to it, 2 space blankets, one to make a shelter with and one to kind of wrap around you, trash bags, a couple of really heavy-duty trash bags. You can, as we talked about earlier, you can stuff them full of leaves, stuff them full of newspapers, insulate yourself from the ground. Also use them for a poncho, whatever. Water. We talked about earlier, 3 days without water, your performance is going to degrade a lot sooner. So how much water you need to carry is going to depend on where you are. We live in a high desert environment. I currently live in the Mojave Desert, in a very, very, very dry environment. You'll need up to a gallon a day, depending on the temperatures outside, hot or cold. In cold weather, people don't think about it as much, but cold weather, you need a lot of water too. You use a lot of water to keep yourself hydrated in cold weather. So you have to think about that. What are you going to carry? Carry some water. I like these lifeboat packets. There's not much in them. There's only about, I think, 8 ounces in them. They're designed for just sitting in a lifeboat, and you drink one a day, just basically keeping you alive. I carry 48 ounces of water in my pack, which is enough to get me started. I figured that's going to get me to my first water source. And then I carry an inline filter that I can use, kind of like in the military, they call it a sewage sucker. Something to think about with your filtration. They're hard to find, but if you're expecting a human disaster, something that filters out viruses is good. As you know, viruses usually don't jump species. So if you're in the backcountry where there's no other people, probably not going to get much in the way of a virus. You just worry about bacteria and cysts. Those are pretty common filters and easy to get. Getting one if you're in an urban area and you're worried about human contamination, whether it's
hepatitis and stuff like that.
Yeah, feces, all that stuff in the water, where that water is going to be contaminated by humans. You want a much more fine filter that's going to be able to get viruses out. It's not going to be as efficient. The one that I use that does viruses only does about a half liter a minute, as opposed to twice that or more for a lot of filters that just do bacteria and cysts and heavy particulates. And it's not going to last as long. Mine will only do about maybe 150 gallons. But it's long enough, and I prefer the extra protection of something that's going to give me viral protection because I live in an urban area, and it's probably something I'm going to have to deal with. I carry multiple ways of carrying the water, not just in those little packets, but I have 2 separate water containers, roll-up water containers, so that my eggs are not all in one basket. If something springs a leak, I've got something else. And I've also got the bottle that goes with it to be able to mix up drink mixes and stuff like that. We'll talk about that. Food pack. I've changed from this slide. I used to make just my own food package of jerky and power bars and stuff like that, energy bars that I liked. I found that the expiration dates, it was too much hassle to keep those up to date. So I just chose to go with a lifeboat rations. There's one little brick. It's 3,000 calories. You break it up. It comes in. The brick has 12 segments in it. Even 500 or 600 calories a day is going to keep you going a long time. Most of us eat way too much food as it is,
right.
As you know, and so just having, and it's easy to share that with people too. Communications and signaling. After you've got yourself some shelter, after you've got yourself water, food, the next 2 there's going to be communications and there's going to be a medical component. It's hard to say which is more. Obviously, if you're injured or sick, the medical component's more important. If you're not, the communications is probably more important. Not only do you need to be able to reach out and touch, get help if you need to get help or communicate with people, but you also need to know what's going on with the world outside. So if you are evacuating and you've got multiple choices of which direction to go, Hey, do I want to go north? Whoa, wow, listen to the radio. Yikes. They're not doing so good up north. Maybe we should head west or east to a place that's not as heavily impacted. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. I would say the minimum would either be like your cell phone, which most of us carry, or just a little pocket weather radio. You get a lot of information off of that. Ideally, you and I've talked about this, a ham radio is much better. You can gain a lot of information by being, if you know what to look for on a ham radio, through different networks, and be able to reach out a lot farther to people if necessary and pass messages along. Ham radios are definitely something I think that is worth, if you're serious about, and if you really feel like you need to do this kind of stuff, getting your ham radio license is I think, a very important thing to do. And you'll see that here in the next slide. Boop. I've got a whole little signal kit there. It includes a signal mirror and a loud whistle as well. You want to have a visual and audio means of signaling. I can't tell you how important, especially the audio, the whistle, is as a search and rescue person. I'm not going to hear you crying for help, but I am going to hear your loud whistle. If you got a really good whistle, and you're going to be able to blow that whistle a lot longer than you are going to be able to scream for help before your voice blows out. First aid and medical. This is kind of one of those things that is kind of a personal pet peeve of mine. Equip yourself to the level of your training. I've seen guys carrying surgical kits and all kinds of crazy stuff, and I'm like, what are you going to do with that? Well, I seen online, or I read a book, and it's like, okay, that's
right. Are you a trauma surgeon?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Are you any kind of surgeon? Right. Are you a podiatrist?
Right,
I mean,
sure.
have you ever
Can you use these tools?
Right. Do you know what you're doing with these? And the reason for that is not because I'm feeling elitist and because I don't think that it's a good idea to have these things, but you can do a lot of damage to yourself and to other people by having equipment that you're really not qualified and trained to use on. And it gets awkward because if you have it, the implication is that you're going to use it. So it's like, well, I just have this in case somebody else knows how to use it, and you're on scene with somebody and they're like, well, why aren't you you've got this cool thing over here, why aren't you helping me with that? Right. It gets
Sure.
awkward, and so, like I said, just be aware of that. Avoid carrying things that you don't know how to use, that you don't need. It's extra weight, and it's awkward. You see a quick list of my first aid kit here. The boo-boo kit that's listed on there basically is just a general first aid kit. It's for aspirin, spray, Band-Aids, moleskin. Don't forget to take care of your feet. Bring some moleskin, Big Daddy.
I know.
Yes.
Well aware of that.
Yes. Bring some stuff to take care of your feet. Keep your toenails trimmed. If you have to walk, trust me, your feet, most of us have nice, soft, cushy American feet, that we're not used to doing, 20-mile rucks or anything like that. And if you actually do have to wind up walking any distance, your footwear and the care of your feet is going to be super important.
Critical.
Yeah. I carry a little package with what I call some essential tools, which is lighting. I like to have at least two sources. I carry a flashlight on me all the time as part of my everyday carry, and we'll talk about that later. But I also carry a headlamp in my emergency bag. One of those should be a headlamp. It's nice to be able to work hands-free. But having a light that's in your hand that you can shine around things, or that you can use to change the battery in the other light, having two sources is always good. And it's good to be able to make them flash. So whether you're just using your hand or whatever. A lot of people are and a lot of the survival kits that you buy online have glow sticks, things like that in them. Mixed feelings about that. They make really good signaling devices when you put them on a string and make what we call a wagon wheel. You can see those quite a ways away if it's unobstructed. But mostly they don't put out a lot of light. And they're just kind of, I think they're just kind of extra baggage. Your results may vary. Your mileage may vary.
Right.
But have batteries for your lights, and ideally have your lights run off the same batteries, so you're not
interchangeable.
Yeah, you're not having a lot of. Have a compass. Know how to use it. Even if you don't have a map, if you can get a hand-drawn map or whatever, or you can map your own stuff. Draw your own maps, you D&D GMers. But you can, having a map to, if somebody says, hey, you need to go north 3 blocks to get out of here. Okay, which way is north?
Yeah.
That's especially true if you're traveling. But even in a city that I know very well, sometimes I get in a dark section of the town at night, and I get myself turned around, and you're like, okay, I don't see any landmarks right now. Which way am I going? Okay. Having a compass and knowing how to use it, super key. Some sort of multi-tool or knife. Good idea. Yeah. It helps you repair things, make things. It's not necessarily from making stabby, but I guess if you had to, you could. Right. PPE. Have a set of gloves, work gloves. Protect your hands. Hands and feet. Getting those damaged, and they're prone to damage. Protect them. Don't get infections. Don't get, a bandana or N95 mask for your airway. Mm-hmm. We talked about earlier. Bear in mind that those things are only good, even a really good CBRN gas mask, a good gas mask that's like a military grade that'll protect you from nuclear, biological, chemical, explosives, radiological stuff. Those are only good for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And that can, depending on the saturation level of the environment that you're in. So don't think of whatever you're using to protect your airway as something that means that you can go in and to an environment. This is meant to get you out of that environment. So even those N95 masks, 20 in a high particulate area, maybe only 10 to 20 minutes tops. Maybe 30, 40 minutes, at least no more than 60 in relatively clean conditions. But if you're worried about things like coronavirus or whatever, an airborne or droplet-borne pathogen. Have some repair stuff. Have some duct tape, have some super glue at a minimum. If it moves and it's not supposed to move, it gets duct tape. If it doesn't move and it's supposed to move, it gets a hammer and some WD-40. Right. You know what I mean? It's the kind of crude, but there it is. This is a little list here that will show you kind of what I keep. I keep a little sewing kit. I keep a multi-tool. Keep some work gloves. You can see it right there. It's pretty straightforward. Hygiene. Don't neglect this, especially if you're going to be for more than a few hours. You're going to get sick. You're going to make somebody else sick. And nobody likes to be around a stinky person.
Sure. So handy wipes.
Yeah, exactly.
Alcohol.
Some baby wipes, some hand sanitizer. You don't need a toothpaste necessarily, but even just a toothbrush and some water. Right. You need some
sure.
Right. Exactly. It's like oh, Tic Tacs, kind of thing. And this is kind of my little hygiene kit. There's some. I include some condoms.
Okay. In
mine. Hope springs eternal. Anybody who thinks that humans don't seek comfort in crisis should look at birth statistics 9 months after after any disaster. If that's better to be prepared and safe and not sorry than morale and entertainment. This is one I think that gets really neglected in most kits. Most people are so focused on, I'm doing this survival thing, and I'm going to be so busy. Truth is that most of the time you're just going to be sitting and waiting for help. After you've secured these basic things, there's going to be very little drama involved, and you're just going to be kind of sitting and waiting. The problem with that is that you get in your own head, and you think, wow, this has been a long time. I need to do something. Right. So have something to distract yourself with. If you're big on religion, get your holy book and that you can read. If you're play solitaire. We joke in search and rescue that you should always have a deck of cards with you, because if you ever lost whatever, just start playing solitaire, and at least 2 other people will show up and tell you what you're doing wrong, tell you how to play. But have something, deck of cards, a book, coloring, something, dice, whatever, to help you pass the time, to make time go. And it's up to you what distracts you. Don't pick something that's not really going to engross you, because you want that time to pass. Right. And you want to be like, oh wow, it's been 3 or 4 hours, I didn't even notice. Now I need to put another stick on the fire or whatever. If you're in a group, having some morale items, like I'll show you in the next thing, can also relieve a lot of tension. Nobody's like eyeballing each other, like, okay, we've already talked about everything that we can talk about now, kind of thing. There's going to be diverse groups, and this is something everybody can kind of hopefully have in common. Yeah. And it'll spread goodwill. Yeah. Being able to help somebody out, and with that will spread some goodwill. This is my entertainment pack, and again, we'll look at it again, but there's a pack of dice, including polyhedrals. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Big Daddy.
Good job.
Deck of cards. I carry coloring pencils. I carry a small coloring book with a pencil sharpener. I carry a Yahtzee pad to just give me the basic outline of Yahtzee, so I don't remember all the points. I carry a notebook and a pen to go with that. I carry a little board game that can be played either solo or with up to 6 people. Mm. Again, how much of this stuff you want to carry, that's up to you and your interests and what you think. But don't discount this coloring book, this little mini coloring book. One of the reasons that I got it was, picture yourself stuck in an airport because of a blizzard or whatever when you're traveling. And there's a bunch of restless, screaming kids or whatever, toddlers running around. Being able to tear a sheet out of this coloring book and give them some coloring pencils. Imagine how much goodwill that's going to spread through the whole terminal. Yeah. When you've got these kids, this parent's going to be like, oh, thank God. Hopefully that's something that you'll be able to do. Yeah. Beyond that covers what I consider, for me, what's important to have. I carry maps of both the city that I'm in currently and the state or region that I'm in, for some road maps, so that if I have to go figure out another way around to get
right. You don't have to worry about
right.
GPS or rely on
exactly. The other thing that I think is probably one of the most important things that you can put in any of these bags and put in a nice sealed heavy-duty Ziploc container is copies of all your important information. Passport numbers, driver's license numbers, insurance numbers and phone numbers, credit card numbers and phone numbers, any professional identifications that you have, copies of all that stuff, and some cash. ATM's not working because the power's out. Credit card machine's not working because the power's out. Use small bills. My rule of thumb is enough for at least 1.5 tanks of gas. Mm. I figure that'll cover inflation. Right. Because when you go to buy gas at a gas station or from somebody who's got some 5-gallon cans because you can't pump the gas because the power's out or whatever, and they're like, oh.
Right, opportunity.
Yeah, I'm thinking $20 a gallon sounds pretty good.
Right, sure.
And we witnessed this firsthand, is that going to a motel. Mm. If you have to, I want to stay out of shelters. I don't like shelters. Shelters, bad things happen in shelters, intentionally or unintentionally. But historically, if you look back at the statistics, shelter is the last place you want to be for any length of time. Frequently get separated from your family, from your animals, from your pets. No bueno. But so if you're going to a motel, a lot of times they're going to jack up the prices because every other refugee is coming through, and it's like, okay, it's human nature. Yeah. We can judge it all we want, but it's kind of human nature.
What it is,
And so having cash is king. Having access to credit cards or whatever, that's great. Cash is king. Cash will always work, at least in the initial days. If you're talking about a disaster where cash no longer works, we've got really big problems if we're down to bartering with gold and silver and bread and that kind of. You're like, we've
gone too far.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's like
prolonged disaster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bigger issues have happened.
Sure.
But cash will always work in a pinch. You can always get some water, some food, whatever. People will usually trade for cash.
Sure.
And beyond that, find a nice bag to put it in. Something doesn't look. I like things that don't look too military. Mm-hmm. Keep the weight of the bag down. That's pretty much about it. And again, you add or subtract things as you think are necessary, as
your
experience
situation
dictates.
Yeah.
What your personal experience is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of advice out there in the interwebs. Mm-hmm. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. Some of it is, I think, a little impractical. From a search and rescue standpoint, which is primarily what you're going to be dealing with here, your car's broke down somewhere, or you're stranded somewhere. Stay put. Unless you absolutely have to, unless it's really unsafe where you are. Water's rising, fire's coming at you, whatever. Stay put. It's a lot easier for me to find a stationary target than it is for me to find a moving target. Stay with your vehicle. Big object's a lot easier to find than a little object, a little person. Yeah. And that's what a lot of that morale kit is for too. It keeps you from wandering off.
Right.
So
like getting bored and making bad decisions.
Exactly. You got anything else that you want to?
No, I think that's fantastic. I think it's a good summary and synopsis of what a basic go-to bag should have. I think there's a few little twists in there I think people enjoy. Ultimately, I just want to say thank you. It was very informative. I'd like to thank all of our listeners and viewers out there. Again, this is Dr. Sean Devlin with Matt Clark on The Medicine Wheel. Take care.
The Medicine Wheel encourages all of our listeners to subscribe to our newsletter and podcasts as we continue to explore the world of medicine, bringing you up-to-date health and science information. The Medicine Wheel invites our listeners to email us any newsworthy stories or topics they wish to explore further and discuss on the podcast. For more information about the Medicine Wheel, please visit us at our website, www.themedicinewheel.org, and on Facebook, and finally on Twitter and Instagram at The Med Wheel.
In an effort to support access to integrative medicine and functional medicine options for those in need and education for those who need information, please consider donating to Project OmCare, 501c3.org. Please go to our website, www.themedicinewheel.org, to learn more.
Thank you again to all our local sponsors, Grateful Gardens, Lighthouse Coffee, and Dorinda's Chocolates, which represent some of the best organic and appetizing options in the Reno, Tahoe area.
Lighthouse Coffee Shop is a proud sponsor of the Medicine Wheel. We are a family-owned and operated local coffee shop. Our goal as a business and a family is to cultivate community wherever we are. All of our coffee is ethically sourced, organic, and farm fresh. It's roasted in-house daily, guaranteeing you access to the freshest cup of coffee on the planet. We care deeply for our community and everyone in it. We strive to provide you with the best ingredients and most comfortable environment. Come and enjoy coffee with us. We are family, and we would love for you to be part of it.
Gerber Medical Clinic is proud to support the Medicine Wheel and medical education to improve health quality, nurturing the lifestyles of our listening community, enhancing wellness for all. Thanks again to Wired Insights and their talented team for making our podcasting dream possible.
In closing, we would like to remind all of our listeners, if you have a medical concern or diagnosis, you need to see your personal doctor without delay, and if needed, obtain a referral to a specialist. If ever you feel the health issue you have is urgent or an emergency, please call 911 and go to your nearest emergency room. Please do not take any of our physicians' commentary or our guests' opinion as medical advice, and always seek out medical care from fully licensed and appropriately trained medical professionals in your area. The information shared in this podcast is for general information only and should not be construed as medical advice, and understand that no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and educational materials linked to this podcast and website are employed at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not meant to be used as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
This is the Medicine Wheel signing off for this week with a reminder to live, love, listen, and learn.